I'll never forget the moment everything changed. One careless mistake, one fleeting moment of vulnerability, and suddenly, I was teetering on the edge of losing everything. Up until that point, I had it all figured out: my routine, my secret. But that day, I felt the foundation of my double life begin to crack. On the outside, I was just another guy living a mundane life. But behind closed doors, I became someone entirely different. Late at night, when the world was asleep, I would slip into dresses and heels, feeling a rush of freedom I could never experience during the day. It was my escape, my way of being truly myself. But like any secret, it came with a price, and the stakes were about to get higher than I ever imagined. It started like any other day, a routine, a normal life. To the outside world, I was just another guy going through the motions. I had a decent job, good manners, and maybe a little shyness. But behind closed doors, in the quiet solitude of my room, I was someone else. No one could ever know. Not my family, not my friends. Society would never understand. I had a secret, a dangerous secret, one that could destroy everything I had built. Cross-dressing wasn't a hobby, it was a lifeline. A part of me that only emerged in the quiet of the night, when I was alone. When the house was still, I would let go of the stresses of the day, slipping into my other persona. The transformation brought me peace, a sense of belonging. But the danger always loomed: one wrong move, one curious glance, and everything would fall apart. I was careful, so careful. Every dress, every pair of heels was hidden away, only worn in the privacy of my locked room. But on that particular day, I made a fatal mistake. I trusted too much. I believed I could live this double life without consequence. And now, something felt different. Someone was watching me. At first, it was subtle, a glance that lasted just a bit too long, a smile from a coworker that lingered. I dismissed it as paranoia, but the feeling only grew stronger. It was as though someone knew. Had I left a trace behind? And then there was Dr. Petal. She had always been kind, professional, someone I trusted. But lately, I noticed a shift. Her tone was different during my appointments, as if she knew more than I was letting on. Her eyes lingered just a moment too long, and her questions became a little too personal. The feeling made my skin crawl. Could she know? Could Dr. Patel have discovered my secret? The thought gnawed at me, making it impossible to focus during our sessions. Every time I stepped into her office, I could barely breathe, waiting for her to ask that one question that would unravel everything. I had been so careful, hadn't I? But the unease in my chest kept growing, and I began to wonder, had I run out of time? Had Dr. Patel uncovered the truth? My entire life, my entire world, hung by a fragile thread. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, maintaining a delicate balance between my two lives. On the surface, I was the person everyone expected me to be: calm, ordinary, living an unremarkable life. I went to work, laughed at the right jokes, kept just enough distance from everyone so they'd never suspect anything. It was safer that way. My job, a mid-level position in a corporate office, was dull but steady. It gave me the stability I craved. I worked quietly, handling tasks with precision, making sure I didn't attract attention. I was polite, reserved, the perfect fit for the corporate world. To them, I was just another cog in the machine. But my real life began when I locked the door behind me at home. The moment I shed my work clothes, it felt like I was shedding the weight of the world. I'd head straight for my closet, where my secret wardrobe was hidden in plain sight. Dresses, skirts, delicate lingerie, each piece carefully concealed, yet always within reach. I knew every item intimately, each one holding a different memory, a different emotion. Dressing up wasn't just about the clothes, it was about the escape. It was the only time I could truly be free, unburdened by the expectations of society. In those quiet moments, I wasn't the reserved man at work. I wasn't the one who hid behind a mask of politeness. I was someone else entirely, someone more real, more alive than I had ever felt in the daylight. The soft fabrics clung to my body, and for the first time, I felt at peace. But deep down, I knew that peace was fleeting. One day someone would find out, and my secret would shatter. As the days went by, the fear of discovery grew stronger. My double life felt more fragile than ever. Every glance, every touch, every moment felt like it could be the one that exposed everything. Yet, I couldn't stop myself. It was a part of me, something I couldn't escape, even if it meant risking it all. And then one fateful day, I felt it. The moment when everything was on the brink of collapsing. Would I be caught? Would my world crumble? Or would I somehow manage to keep my secret intact, living the life I had carefully crafted in the shadows? Only time would tell. It felt right, like I was finally uncovering who I truly was, even if it was only for a brief time. But there was always that nagging voice at the back of my mind, reminding me that this couldn't last, that it was a temporary escape. So each night, after indulging the part of me I had to hide, I carefully put everything away, double-checking every lock, ensuring nothing was out of place. I couldn't afford any slip-ups. If anyone ever found out, I wasn't sure how I'd handle the shame, the judgment, the rejection. But recently, something had changed. It started with Dr. Patel. She had been my doctor for years, smart, capable, and always professional. At first, I never thought much of her beyond the role she played in my routine checkups. But on a recent visit, there was something different in her demeanor. Her questions felt more pointed, her gaze more intense, like she was searching for something beneath the surface. "Have you been feeling different lately?" she asked, her voice calm, but there was an undertone, a knowing one. I immediately felt my heart race. "No, everything's fine," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. Her eyes lingered on me longer than I was comfortable with, and then she smiled. It was polite, but there was a distance to it. It was like she knew I was hiding something, but she didn't say it outright. That smile sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that she saw through me. I couldn't prove it, but there was something in the way she looked at me, more watchful, more aware. Dr. Patel had a power over me that no one else did. She had access to my medical records, my personal history, and she could ask questions I couldn't refuse to answer. What if she dug deeper? What if a simple test or a slip of the tongue revealed my hidden truth? Every appointment with her now felt like walking a tightrope. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking things, but my paranoia was getting the best of me. The way she studied me, it felt like she knew something I didn't, and it made it impossible to relax. I dreaded my next appointment, each time her name appeared in my schedule. It felt like a slow, inevitable march toward exposure, like she held the key to a secret I was struggling to keep buried. Yet, I couldn't avoid her. She was a constant, an authority figure I couldn't escape, and the power she had over me, real or imagined, began to consume my thoughts. What if she wasn't just suspicious? What if she had already figured it out? The more I thought about it, the more anxiety seeped in. Every interaction with her felt like a subtle power struggle. My secret was a ticking bomb, and Dr. Patel had her hand on the detonator, waiting for the perfect moment to expose everything. The days after my last appointment were filled with anxiety. Every interaction with her replayed in my mind, analyzed from every angle. Did she really know, or was it just my imagination? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of discovery. The walls separating my two worlds seemed to be closing in, and the fear of exposure became unbearable. At work, I found myself growing more paranoid. Each time I received an email, my heart raced, half expecting it to be from Dr. Patel, either summoning me for another appointment or, worse, delivering some veiled ultimatum. I couldn't avoid her forever. My next checkup was approaching, and the pressure was already mounting. The day arrived faster than I expected. Sitting in the waiting room, I could feel my palms sweat, my pulse quicken my body, betraying me before I even entered her office. When she called my name, her voice was calm, but I could sense an underlying tone, one that felt like she knew something. I stood up and followed her down the sterile, bright hallway, each step making my legs feel heavier. The door to her office loomed ahead, like the entrance to a trap I was walking into willingly. Once inside, The air was thick with unspoken tension. Dr. Patel glanced at me as I sat down, her eyes lingering just a little too long. I could sense her evaluation. She was searching for something in me. Every glance, every small movement, felt loaded with suspicion. She began with the usual questions, her voice neutral, but her gaze sharp. "How have you been feeling since our last visit? Any changes?" "No, nothing new," I replied quickly, hoping my voice didn't betray my nerves. But I was sure she could hear the pounding of my heart in the silence between us. For a moment, it felt like everything was on the line. She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she shuffled through some papers on her desk, her eyes flicking toward me every now and then. Then, as though it were a casual observation, she said, "You seem different lately." My heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was she going to confront me directly? But then she added, "I don't mean physically." Her voice was calm, slow, and deliberate, but the emotional weight behind it was undeniable. "You seem tense." I froze. It was as if she knew, like she could see right through me, but wasn't saying it outright. Her words hung in the air, thick with implication, like a challenge I wasn't sure I could meet. My mouth went dry as I swallowed, trying to steady myself. "Just work stress, I guess," I said quickly, hoping the lie would come across convincingly. Dr. Patel didn't respond right away. She simply watched me with that unreadable expression, her gaze unyielding. The silence stretched on, each passing second feeling heavier than the last. It was as if she were giving me just enough rope to hang myself, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of revealing everything. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a softer, almost conspiratorial tone. "You know, it's important to take care of yourself, all of yourself." There it was again, another unspoken insinuation. My heart clenched in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Was this her way of letting me know that she knew? Was she testing me, seeing how far she could push before I broke? I forced myself to nod, pretending to agree, all while struggling to keep the rising panic at bay. "I know," I managed to say, though my voice sounded hollow, even to me. The rest of the appointment passed in a blur, but each word felt like a calculated move, every response inching me closer to a checkmate. By the time it was over, I could barely stumble out her office, my mind racing with fear and shame. The thin veil I had kept over my life seemed to be slowly pulled back, piece by piece. Over the next few weeks, the tension only grew. Dr. Patel's presence felt like it was hanging over me, even when I wasn't in her office. Every time I glanced at myself in the mirror, dressed in the clothes I had come to cherish, I couldn't help but wonder if she somehow knew. Could she see through the facade I'd so carefully built? It wasn't long before the subtle clues began to stack up, each one chipping away at my fragile sense of security. Dr. Patel's words echoed in my mind in the quiet moments, making me second-guess everything. I found myself avoiding mirrors, avoiding people, terrified that someone might notice something was different. Maybe she had already told someone. Maybe it was only a matter of time before everyone knew. When I saw her again, she didn't need to say much to unsettle me. The way she looked at me, like she was watching a puzzle slowly come together, was enough to make me feel small under her gaze. It was as though she could expose everything with a single word, tearing down the wall I had so carefully constructed. The tipping point came during one of my visits when she handed me a new prescription. "This should help," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes sharp as they locked onto mine, studying my reaction. It was a prescription for hormone therapy. I stared at the paper in my hand, my mind reeling. It felt like a trap, like she was daring me to refuse, daring me to acknowledge what I had been hiding for so long. The room seemed to spin, the walls closing in around me. "What? What is this for?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel smiled a cold, knowing smile. "It's just what you need." My world was falling apart, and she held the thread. From that moment, I knew she had me cornered, and she knew it. Ever since she handed me that prescription, my life spiraled out of control. Every decision, every moment, felt like it was no longer mine to make. The balance of power had shifted, and I was constantly aware of her looming presence. She hadn't blackmailed me outright, but the implication was clear. She knew my secret, and now she held the reins. At first, her requests were small, seemingly benign. A mandatory follow-up appointment scheduled sooner than necessary. An extra set of tests she claimed were routine. It was easy to convince myself it was nothing, just her being thorough. But each time I sat across from her, the tension between us thickened, and the line between medical professionalism and personal intrusion began to blur. During one of those sessions, Dr. Potel leaned back in her chair, her eyes calculating. "You've been doing well with your treatment, haven't you? Adjusting to the changes?" I nodded mechanically, but my mind screamed in protest. "Yes," I replied, my voice hollow, the weight of her scrutiny pressing down on me. She smiled, cold and knowing. "That's good, but there's something else we need to address. I've noticed certain behaviors in you. We'll need to explore those further." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment, I felt like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me under the weight of her observation. I had no idea what she was implying, but the subtle hint was unmistakable. She wanted something more from me, and there was no room for refusal. Soon, her requests began to escalate. "I need you to come in after hours," she said one evening as I prepared to leave. "There's something we need to discuss privately." Her gaze, firm and commanding, made it clear that this was no mere suggestion, it was a directive, the kind that carried the silent threat of destruction with just a single word. That night, I found myself standing outside the clinic, my heart pounding as though it might leap from my chest. The building, usually calm and orderly, felt airy in its stillness. When I entered her office, what was once a professional and sterile environment now seemed like a carefully laid trap. She gestured for me to sit, her demeanor calm, but the danger lurking beneath was palpable. "I've been thinking about your situation," she began, her voice smooth, but edged with something darker. "I believe it's time for you to face it head-on." A knot twisted in my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice betraying the unease rising inside me. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out a small box and placed it on the desk between us. "Open it," she ordered. My hands shook as I reached for the box, unsure of what to expect. When I opened it, I was met with the sight of neatly folded women's lingerie. My face turned crimson, panic surging through my veins. "I can't," I stammered, trying to push the box away. "Oh, but you can," Dr. Patel interrupted, her voice soft but unyielding. "And you will. This is part of your treatment. You need to embrace what you've been hiding." I felt trapped, suffocated by the pressure in the room. Every instinct in me screamed to refuse, to run, but fear held me in place. She knew she had me where she wanted me. "Go on," she coaxed, her tone turning almost gentle, though it was laced with manipulation. "I'll give you privacy, but I expect you to comply. It's for your own good." The door clicked shut behind her, and I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the clothes before me. My mind raced, caught in a whirlwind of shame and confusion. How had it come to this? Part of me despised Dr. Potel, hated myself for allowing this to happen. But there was a quieter, more insidious voice inside me, whispering that maybe it wouldn't be so bad to just give in, to stop resisting. With trembling hands, I finally complied, slipping into the garments she had left for me. My reflection in the mirror was foreign, yet strangely familiar. I hated how I looked, yet something deep inside stirred in response to the transformation. Vulnerability washed over me in ways I had never anticipated, leaving me feeling exposed, but not entirely repelled. When Dr. Patel returned, her eyes studied me intently, her expression unreadable. "See," she said softly, almost condescendingly. "This is who you are." I couldn't respond. My throat was too tight, emotions swirling in a chaotic storm within me. I felt humiliated, powerless under her gaze. And yet, despite the overwhelming shame, I couldn't deny the pull, the small, quiet voice inside that whispered, "What comes next?" In the following days, Dr. Patel's psychological hold over me only grew stronger. She began calling me at odd hours, demanding I attend unscheduled appointments. Each time she pushed me further, eroding any remaining control I thought I had over my life. Her comments about my appearance, my movements, and subtle suggestions on how I should present myself became more frequent, more invasive. She seemed to revel in my discomfort, her every word dripping with manipulation. "You're doing well," she would say, her voice soft, almost maternal. "But you still have a long way to go." I felt like a puppet, my every move dictated by her whims. The person staring back at me in the mirror was a stranger. I was losing myself, and I couldn't tell whether I wanted to find my way back or continue down the dark path Dr. Patel had set for me. The line between who I was and who she was forcing me to become blurred with each passing day. As much as I wanted to hate her for it, I couldn't ignore the quiet allure of surrendering completely to her control. But at what cost? It was a Thursday afternoon when everything began to unravel. I had convinced myself that I could keep up with Dr. Patel's demands, that I could hide the changes from the world outside her office. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before my fragile facade would crumble. That day had arrived. I sat in a meeting with my colleagues, pretending everything was normal, but my heart raced in my chest. I tried to focus on the presentation in front of me, but the weight of my secret was suffocating, threatening to spill over at any moment. Dr. Patel's grip on my life had become suffocating, a relentless, invisible chain that tightened around me with every passing day. She had taken control of everything, reducing me to a puppet whose strings she pulled at will. Outwardly, I kept up appearances, but inside, I was unraveling. During a routine meeting at work, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced down, hoping it was nothing urgent. My heart skipped a beat as I saw her name flash across the screen. Dr. Patel. Hands trembling, I opened the message. "Come to my office. Now, bring the items." A cold shiver ran down my spine. My heart raced. How could she demand this of me during work hours? Panic clawed at me, but I knew better than to ignore her summons. She had made it crystal clear disobedience would have dire consequences. Making a weak excuse to my boss, I left the office in a daze. The short drive to her clinic felt endless, each second a drumbeat of anxiety in my chest. My mind spiraled. What did she want this time? How far would she push me? When I arrived, she was waiting at the entrance, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held that familiar spark of control. "You're late," she said, her voice sharp and clipped. "I am sorry," I stammered, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I came as fast as I could." Her gaze hardened, offering no forgiveness. "Follow me," she commanded, turning on her heel and striding toward her office. The walk down that hallway felt different today, heavier, more foreboding. I'd been to her office countless times before, but this time the air seemed to hum with tension. Once inside, she closed the door with a soft, deliberate click that sent a chill straight to my core. "You know why you're here," she said, her tone deceptively calm. "Put them on." I froze, my mind screaming at me to refuse. But the weight of her authority pressed down on me. She held my secret in her hands, and with it my life. I couldn't risk defying her. With shaking hands, I pulled out the garments she had given me before, soft fabrics that now felt more like chains. Each piece I put on felt like a part of myself was being stripped away. When I was fully dressed, I stood before her, feeling exposed, vulnerable, and utterly trapped. Dr. Patel circled me slowly, like a predator inspecting its prey. Her eyes scanned every detail, her gaze cold and calculating. "Good," she murmured, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "You're finally starting to look like your true self." Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. The humiliation was suffocating. Then she smiled, a cruel, knowing smile that sent a wave of dread through me. "I think it's time," she said casually, as if we were discussing the weather. "Time for what?" I whispered, barely able to speak. Time for the world to meet the real you, she said, her eyes gleaming with twisted delight. My heart stopped. No, no, please, I begged, my voice cracking. Don't do this. Her smile vanished, replaced by a steely glare. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. I own you now. Every part of you. I felt tears sting my eyes as she leaned in, her words cutting deep. And you will do as I say, or I'll make sure your secret is known to everyone, your colleagues, your family, everyone. I nodded weakly, my entire body trembling. There was no way out. She had backed me into a corner, and I was trapped. The hours that followed passed in a blur of anxiety and dread. By evening, I found myself at her house, standing awkwardly in her living room. It was a small gathering, colleagues, acquaintances, people I saw every day at work. They mingled, oblivious to what was coming. Dr. Patel moved through the room effortlessly, commanding attention with her presence. When she spoke, conversations stopped, and all eyes turned to her. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice smooth and confident. I have a special guest tonight, someone who has been hiding their true self from you for far too long. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I could feel the blood rushing to my face as panic gripped me. No, please no. But she wasn't stopping. She gestured toward me with a slow, deliberate motion, and suddenly, every pair of eyes in the room was on me. Meet the real them, Dr. Patel announced, her voice dripping with triumph. The room fell into stunned silence. The air was thick with tension, and I felt the walls closing in on me. My entire body trembled under their gazes, shock, confusion, and judgment reflected in their expressions. I wanted to run, to vanish into thin air, but there was nowhere to go. Dr. Patel's smile widened as she took in the scene, her voice soft yet commanding. Go on, she said to the crowd. Say hello. The shame and humiliation hit me like a tidal wave. I stood frozen, suffocating under the weight of it all. This was it. My deepest fear, realized. And as I stood there, fully exposed to the world, a part of me wondered if this nightmare would ever end, or if I was destined to lose myself completely in the web of control Dr. Patel had woven around me. The weight of the moment crushed me, making it hard to breathe. My chest tightened as emotions surged, and I could feel the sting of tears threatening to spill. This was it, the breaking point. There was no undoing what had happened, no way to reclaim the dignity that had been stripped from me. Everything I had built, my control, my carefully crafted image, was gone. But amidst the wreckage of my old life, something unexpected stirred. The fear and shame still clung to me like shadows, but beneath it, a strange feeling emerged. It wasn't peace, nor was it comfort. It was raw, twisted liberation. I had been exposed, yes, but the burden of secrecy was gone. Dr. Patel's ruthless unveiling had shattered my walls, leaving me vulnerable, yet oddly free. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. And maybe, just maybe, that was a victory, if only a small one. The days that followed felt surreal, as though I was drifting through a new world, weightless yet fragile. The suffocating pressure of hiding my truth was gone, but in its place an unsettling emptiness took root. I walked through life lighter, but stripped bare, like a tree in winter branches exposed, no longer cloaked in leaves. I hadn't seen or spoken to Dr. Patel since that night. A part of me dreaded her return, but another part, the one she had carefully cultivated, felt the ache of her absence. Her control had been suffocating, yet without it, I felt untethered. It was as though an invisible thread still connected us, pulling me toward her even when I resisted. The people who had witnessed my fall treated me differently now. They didn't speak of what had happened, but their silence spoke volumes. Their lingering glances, awkward pauses, and avoidance told me everything I needed to know. They knew. And that knowledge, no matter how unspoken, had changed the way they saw me. Yet, in that shift, I found clarity. Dr. Patel had broken me, yes, but in doing so, She forced me to confront a truth I'd buried deep within myself. The secret I'd clung to, the one I feared would destroy me, was now out in the open. There was no running from it, and though it had cost me dearly, there was relief in not having to hide anymore. A week after the gathering, a message from her appeared on my phone. The sight of her name made my heart stutter. My hands shook as I opened it. "I'm proud of you. You've come so far. But remember, this is just the beginning." A chill ran down my spine. The message was short, but it carried all the weight of her lingering influence. Even now, she hadn't let me go. Her control was quieter, subtler, but no less potent. Even in her silence, she loomed large in my mind, a constant presence. I stared at the message, emotions swirling inside me: fear, anger, confusion, and something darker, harder to name. She had turned my life upside down, stripped me of my old self. And yet, a part of me couldn't deny the connection we shared. It was twisted and destructive, but undeniable. Could I ever truly break free? Or was this my new reality, a life lived under the shadow of her influence? That thought haunted me as I stood in my empty apartment. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. I could choose to walk away, to sever the ties and rebuild what was left of my fractured identity. But the scars she left wouldn't heal easily. Her mark was permanent, etched into my very soul. I had been exposed in ways I never imagined, and that exposure had fundamentally changed me. I wasn't the same person I had been before she entered my life. The tension, the unease, the fear, it all still simmered beneath the surface. Perhaps this was the price of freedom, the realization that true liberation doesn't come from escape, but from acceptance. And yet, even as I tried to make peace with this new reality, uncertainty lingered. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. There were battles ahead, battles I wasn't sure I was ready to fight. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, searching for answers in the unfamiliar face staring back at me. The world now knew who I was, but the real challenge lay in discovering who I could be without her. The scars, the memories, the pain, they would follow me like shadows, constant reminders of the cost of my freedom. But for now, there was only one thing I could do: take a step forward, into the unknown,